Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki sat in the operations room, reading the morning intelligence brief, and allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The American B-29 bombers had been hitting Japan for 3 months now. The results were, in his professional assessment, embarrassing for the Americans. 78 bombers over Tokyo last night, his aide reported, attacking from 25,000 feet. Cloud cover prevented accurate bombing. Estimated damage? 12 buildings destroyed. No strategic targets affected. Ugaki nodded. The mathematics were simple. The Americans were flying the most expensive bomber ever built. The B-29 Superfortress cost $600,000 per aircraft, more than 4 times the price of a B-17. Across 3,000 miles of ocean to drop bombs from altitudes so high, they couldn't hit anything meaningful. Their precision bombing doctrine is a failure, Ugaki said, tapping the damage reports. They target our aircraft factories, our steel mills, our refineries. They fly in daylight from extreme altitude. The winds at 25,000 feet scatter their bombs across entire neighborhoods. Last week, they aimed for the Nakajima aircraft plant. Their bombs landed in a residential area 2 miles away. Dutters. He wasn't gloating. This was professional analysis from a man who'd spent 35 years in naval aviation. Ugaki understood strategic bombing. He'd studied the theories, observed the European campaigns, analyzed the data. The B-29 was a technological marvel. Pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, range exceeding 3,000 miles, ceiling above 30,000 feet. But technology without effective doctrine was just expensive machinery. The Americans believe they can win wars from 25,000 feet. Ugaki continued, they think precision bombardment of industrial targets will cripple our war production. It's a fantasy. Our factories are dispersed. Our workforce adapts. We relocate production to smaller workshops throughout the cities. His reasoning was sound. The American strategic bombing campaign against Japan had begun in November 1944, operating from newly captured bases in the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, Guam. 4 months of operations, hundreds of sorties, thousands of tons of bombs dropped. Results? Negligible. Japanese war production was actually increasing. Aircraft output in January 1945 exceeded December 1944 numbers. The Americans were hemorrhaging resources. Each B-29 mission cost millions of dollars, risked dozens of aircraft, and hundreds of crew for marginal tactical results. They'll continue this ineffective campaign until they realize it's futile, Ugaki predicted. Then they'll attempt an invasion, which we will resist with every resource at our disposal. The Americans lack the stomach for the casualties an invasion will require. Around him, staff officers nodded. The analysis was impeccable, conservative, based on observable evidence and historical precedent. What Ugaki didn't know was that 1,500 miles south, on the island of Guam, a chain-smoking Air Force general named Curtis LeMay was about to abandon every principle of American strategic bombing doctrine. What none of them knew was that in 16 days, Tokyo would experience a firestorm that would make Dresden look like a campfire. What they couldn't imagine was that the careful, ineffective, expensive precision bombing campaign they'd been observing was about to transform into something that had never existed in human history: industrial-scale urban incineration. The B-29s weren't failing. They were just warming up. And the expert analysis that told Ugaki he was safe was about to become the most catastrophic miscalculation of the Pacific War. November 24, 1944. Saipan, Mariana Islands, 0530 hours. Temperature, 78 degrees Fahrenheit. The air tasted of aviation fuel and coral dust. Brigadier General Haywood Hansel stood on the runway watching B-29s taxi for takeoff, and the weight of failure pressed down on him like the humid morning air. He was 41 years old, a founding theorist of American strategic bombing doctrine. He'd helped write the manual, literally written it, on precision daylight bombardment. He believed in it with religious conviction. Hit the enemy's industrial capacity, destroy their ability to make war, win through economic strangulation, not through destruction of cities. The theory was beautiful. The execution was a disaster. "How many bombers are we launching?" Hansel asked his operations officer. 88, sir. Target is the Musashi aircraft engine plant outside Tokyo." Hansel nodded. The Musashi plant was a legitimate strategic target. Destroy it, and you eliminate 30% of Japan's aircraft engine production. This was what strategic bombing was designed to accomplish. But Hansel had known since the first mission 3 weeks ago, that it wasn't working. The problems were technical and environmental, compounding into failure. The B-29 was designed for high-altitude precision bombing using the Norden bomb sight, a device so secret that bombardiers swore blood oaths to protect it. At 25,000 feet over Kansas, the Norden could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel. Over Japan, it was useless. "The jet stream," Hansel muttered. "Sir?" "The jet stream. We didn't know about it. The meteorologists had no data. Japan sat beneath a river of wind, 200-mile-per-hour winds at 30,000 feet, winds that didn't exist over Europe or North America, winds that scattered bomb patterns across miles of terrain. The bombardiers would line up their targets, calculate wind speed and direction at ground level, release their bombs, and watch them drift sideways like leaves in a hurricane. Toot! A mission targeting the Nakajima aircraft plant would hit residential neighborhoods. A raid aimed at steel mills would crater rice paddies. The bombs were landing in Japan. They just weren't landing on anything that mattered. "Yesterday's raid on the dock facilities," Hansel said. "Results?" The operations officer consulted his clipboard. Reconnaissance shows approximately 2% of bombs hit within the target area. The rest landed in Tokyo Bay or civilian neighborhoods. 2%. Hansel felt the number like a physical blow. The missions were brutal for the crews. 7-hour flights each way. Temperatures at altitude dropping to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Oxygen masks freezing. Gun turrets malfunctioning in the cold. And the engines, the magnificent, troubled, fire-prone Wright R3350 engines that powered the B-29. "How many aborts today?" Hansel asked. 14 aircraft turned back with engine trouble. 3 are reporting cylinder head failures. 1 is declaring an emergency. Engine fire attempting to reach Iwo Jima. The B-29 was the most advanced bomber ever built. Pressurized cabin meant crews didn't need oxygen masks below 30,000 feet. Remote-controlled gun turrets meant better defensive firepower. Range meant they could hit Japan from the Marianas, but those magnificent R3350 engines were eating themselves, overheating, catching fire, failing at rates that terrified the crews. The boys are calling it the B-29, Boeing's contribution to the Japanese Air Force, the operations officer said quietly. Hansel didn't smile. The joke was gallows humor, and it revealed a truth he couldn't ignore. His bomber force was ineffective, unreliable, and hemorrhaging morale. But there was more. Something worse than the technical problems. "The directive from Washington," Hansel said. "Let me see it again." The operations officer handed him the typed orders. Hansel had memorized them, but he read them anyway, hoping the words would somehow change. Tuanpan Bomber Command is directed to conduct precision strategic bombing against Japanese industrial and military targets. Civilian areas are not to be targeted except when military necessity requires destruction of industrial targets located within urban centers. Precision strategic bombing. The doctrine Hansel had helped create. The theory that said you could win wars by destroying factories, not cities. By crippling economies, not incinerating populations. It wasn't working. In 4 months, his B-29s had flown 1,500 sorties and dropped 3,500 tons of bombs on Japan. Japanese aircraft production hadn't declined. Japanese steel output remained steady. Japanese war-making capacity was unaffected. The AAF was spending $3 billion on the B-29 program, more than the Manhattan Project, and getting negligible results. General Arnold is sending a new commander, the operations officer said carefully. Curtis LeMay. He's taking over Tadithkon Bomber Command. Hansel nodded slowly. He'd expected this. You don't preside over failure and keep command. That wasn't how the Air Forces worked. When does he arrive? January 20th. Curtis LeMay. Hansel knew the name, knew the reputation. LeMay was 38 years old, a brigadier general with a face like granite and a mind like a calculator. He'd commanded B-29s over Europe, pioneered formation tactics, survived missions with casualty rates that broke other commanders. LeMay was effective, ruthless, and utterly unconcerned with doctrine or theory. He cared about results. What's he going to do differently? The operations officer asked. Hansel looked out at the B-29s, silver in the dawn light, climbing toward Japan to drop bombs that wouldn't hit their targets. I don't know, Hansel said, but whatever it is, it won't be what we taught him at Air Corps Tactical School. What Hansel didn't know, couldn't know, was that LeMay was about to throw away every principle of American strategic bombing and replace it with something simpler. Burn Japan until they surrender. What the Japanese admirals observing the ineffective high-altitude raids didn't know was that those raids were practice, training missions. The Americans were learning the routes, testing defenses, mapping targets. The real bombing campaign hadn't started yet. January 20th, 1945. Guam, Mariana Islands. LeMay's headquarters office. Temperature, 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Cigar smoke thick enough to slice. Curtis E. LeMay sat behind his desk, studying reconnaissance photographs of Tokyo, and the solution was obvious. Painfully, brutally obvious. Just, they're made of wood, he said. His staff officers looked at each other. LeMay's first meeting, his first statement. They're made of wood. Sir? Someone ventured. LeMay tapped the photos. Japanese cities. They're made of wood and paper. The buildings, the homes, the factories, 90% wood construction. We've been trying to hit individual factories with high explosive bombs from 25,000 feet. It's not working. He leaned back, bit his cigar. The room waited. Curtis LeMay had a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by someone angry at the stone. He was 38 years old, youngest general in the Air Forces. He'd flown 20 combat missions over Europe, survived flak and fighters, watched friends burn in bombers. He didn't speak much. When he did, people listened. The British figured this out over Germany, LeMay continued. You can't precision bomb a modern industrial nation into surrender. The factories are too dispersed. The workforce adapts. But you can burn their cities. The British burned Hamburg, Cologne, Dresden, created firestorms that consumed everything for miles. One of his operations officers, Colonel John Montgomery, spoke carefully. "Sir, our doctrine specifically prohibits area bombing of civilian targets. We're not the British. We conduct precision strategic bombardment." LeMay's expression didn't change. "How's that working?" Silence. "We've dropped 3,500 tons of bombs in 4 months. Japanese war production hasn't declined. We're losing crews, losing aircraft, and accomplishing nothing. Our doctrine says hit factories. I'm going to hit factories. They just happen to be surrounded by wooden buildings full of people making war materials." The rationalization was thin. Everyone in the room knew it. Area bombing meant civilian casualties. Massive civilian casualties. The kind of casualties that violated every principle of American strategic bombing doctrine. The European theater used incendiaries on urban areas, LeMay said. Thermite, magnesium, napalm creates firestorms. Temperatures reach 1,800 degrees. Everything burns. Buildings, streets, people. The fires create their own weather systems. Winds get sucked into the center. You can't put them out. He spread out more reconnaissance photos: Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, dense urban centers where war production had been dispersed into thousands of small workshops and home factories. The Japanese moved their manufacturing out of large plants and into neighborhoods, LeMay said. Women assembling aircraft parts in their homes, machine shops in residential areas. You can't precision bomb that, but you can burn it. Colonel Montgomery tried again. General Arnold's directive specifies precision bombing. Washington expects results. LeMay cut him off. Arnold sent me here to make this campaign work. High-altitude precision bombing isn't working, so we're changing tactics. The plan that emerged over the next weeks was radical, heretical, brilliant in its brutal simplicity. Lower altitude. Instead of bombing from 25,000, 30,000 feet to avoid flak, LeMay would send his B-29s in at 5,000, 8,000 feet, below the jet stream, where bombardiers could actually see their targets, where winds didn't scatter the bomb pattern across 3 miles. Strip the guns. Most defensive armament would be removed. Less weight meant more bombs, more range, better performance. Night attacks. Japanese night fighter capability was weak. Radar-equipped interceptors were rare. Flying at night meant reduced visibility for anti-aircraft guns. Incendiaries. Instead of high-explosive bombs designed to destroy concrete and steel, LeMay would load his bombers with M69 incendiary clusters, bomblets filled with napalm, and thermite designed specifically to set wooden buildings on fire. Area bombing. Instead of aiming for specific factories, bombardiers would target entire districts. Saturation bombing. The goal wasn't precision. It was totality. "This is going to be controversial," Montgomery said. LeMay's expression remained flat. War is controversial. Losing is worse. The M69 incendiary was a weapon of elegant simplicity. 6-pound bomblet filled with jellied gasoline. Napalm. A cluster bomb held 38 M69s. They'd scatter over a wide area, punch through roofs, ignite, and spread sticky fire that couldn't be extinguished with water. The British had used similar weapons on German cities. The results were documented: firestorms that consumed square miles, created hurricane-force winds, heated the air to lethal temperatures. Survivors described streets melting, rivers boiling, people dying from heat alone, their lungs seared by superheated air. How many aircraft can we put over a target? LeMay asked. On a maximum effort? 300 B-29s. And how many incendiaries can each aircraft carry? At reduced altitude with guns removed? About 16,000 pounds. That's approximately 110 clusters, about 4,000 individual bomblets per aircraft. LeMay did the math instantly. 300 aircraft, 1.2 million incendiary bomblets. That'll start a lot of fires. The first test would be Tokyo, the most densely populated city on Earth. 7.5 million people crammed into an urban area where most structures were wood frame construction with paper walls, where narrow streets and canals created a maze that would channel fire, where fire departments were already understaffed due to the war. Tokyo was built to burn. LeMay was about to provide the match. Target date? Montgomery asked. March 9th, LeMay said. We'll give them the biggest fire they've ever seen. What Vice Admiral Ugaki and his staff couldn't know from their observations of high-altitude precision raids was that the Americans had been studying Japanese urban construction for months, analyzing fire spread patterns, calculating optimal incendiary loads, testing different attack altitudes. The Air Forces had built replicas of Japanese neighborhoods at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. Actual Japanese-style houses with authentic construction materials. They'd bombed these replicas with different incendiary combinations, measuring fire spread, testing effectiveness. The conclusion? Japanese urban areas were uniquely vulnerable to incendiary attack, more vulnerable than German cities, more vulnerable than anything in human history. Wood construction, high density, narrow streets, efficient fire spread, limited firefighting capability. And the wind. In March, Tokyo experienced strong winds from the north. Natural draft that would feed fires, spread flames, create conditions for firestorm. LeMay was planning to turn Tokyo into a furnace, and the Japanese High Command, watching B-29s drop occasional bombs from 25,000 feet, had no idea what was coming. This is going to break something, Montgomery said quietly. Either the Japanese war effort or our reputation. LeMay bit his cigar. Better theirs than ours. February 1945. LeMay's B-29s conducted tests. Small-scale incendiary raids on secondary cities. Kobe, Nagoya. Experimenting with altitude, bomb load, tactics. The results were immediate and horrifying. Fires spread faster than anyone had calculated. Entire neighborhoods vanished in flame. Fire departments couldn't respond. Too many fires, too little equipment, too much chaos. Kobe raid burned 2.5 square miles, Montgomery reported. We used 69 aircraft carrying incendiaries, destroyed approximately 8,000 buildings, estimated civilian casualties 2,000. 69 aircraft, 2,000 dead, 29 dead per aircraft. LeMay nodded. Scale that up. 300 aircraft. Do the math. The math was terrifying, and it was exactly what LeMay intended. The doctrine had failed. Precision bombing hadn't worked. Now came the alternative. Overwhelming, indiscriminate, apocalyptic fire. Not because LeMay was cruel. He wasn't. He was effective. And effectiveness in war meant destroying the enemy's ability to fight by whatever means proved most efficient. If Japanese war production was dispersed throughout urban neighborhoods, then urban neighborhoods became legitimate military targets. The logic was clean. The consequences would be monstrous. March 8, 1945. Guam. LeMay addressed his bomber crews. Tomorrow we're hitting Tokyo with everything we've got. Low altitude, 5,000 to 8,000 feet. No guns except tail turrets. Maximum incendiary load. We're going in at night. By the time we're done, there won't be much left to bomb." The crews were silent. They understood what this meant. Low altitude meant vulnerability to flak. No guns meant inability to defend against fighters. Incendiaries meant they were burning cities, not hitting factories. "Some of you are going to die tomorrow," LeMay continued, his voice flat, unemotional. "The Japanese are going to shoot at us. Some aircraft won't come back. But if we do this right, we'll burn out the heart of Tokyo. We'll destroy their war production. We'll end this war faster. The question isn't whether this is hard. The question is whether you'd rather lose friends tomorrow or lose thousands of soldiers in an invasion next year." The choice, framed that way, wasn't really a choice. That night, ground crews loaded incendiaries, 1,665 tons of M69 clusters, enough napalm to create a lake of fire, enough thermite to ignite a city. The crews tried to sleep. Most couldn't. They knew tomorrow would be different, historic, the kind of mission men remember or die trying to forget. In Tokyo, 1,500 miles north, the city slept. 7.5 million people, most in wooden houses with paper walls, most with no idea that 325 B-29 bombers were being loaded with weapons designed specifically to set their homes on fire. Vice Admiral Ugaki reviewed the evening intelligence brief. "American bomber activity? Quiet, sir. Minimal radio traffic from Guam. Possibly a stand-down day." Ugaki nodded. The Americans seemed to be reducing their ineffective bombing campaign. Good. Perhaps they were finally acknowledging reality. What he didn't know was that at that moment, 325 B-29s were taxiing on Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. Engines warming, crews checking equipment, bombardiers arming clusters of incendiaries. The arsonist solution was about to light the biggest fire in human history. March 9, 1945, 15 hours, B-29. Lucky Irishman, 7,000 feet over Tokyo Bay. Temperature in aircraft, 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind, 28 miles per hour from the northwest. Major Thomas Power leaned forward in the cockpit, watching Tokyo spread below him like a carpet of dim lights, and felt something he rarely experienced: doubt. He was the Pathfinder, first aircraft over the target. His job was to mark the aiming point with incendiaries so the following waves, 324 B-29s carrying 1,665 tons of fire, would know where to drop. Below him, Tokyo was dark under blackout conditions, but not completely dark. Enough ambient light to see the urban grid, rivers, canals, the dense central districts where factories and homes pressed together in wood frame intimacy. "Bombardier," Power said into the intercom, "you have the aircraft." "Roger, I have the aircraft. 2 minutes to release." Those 2 minutes were silence and wind noise and the thunder of 4 Wright R3350 engines pushing 141,000 pounds of aircraft and incendiaries through the night air. Power thought about the briefing, the target, an X-shaped industrial area in downtown Tokyo. Dimensions: 1.5 miles by 2 miles. Content: approximately 250,000 people. War factories, machine shops, small manufacturing. All the dispersed production that high-altitude precision bombing couldn't touch. 30 seconds, the bombardier announced. Power watched the ground through the nose glass. At 7,000 feet, everything was clear. No jet stream, no scatter, The Norden bomb sight could actually work at this altitude. Bombs away. The aircraft lurched upward as 6,000 pounds of incendiary clusters fell away. Power counted. 5 seconds. 10, 15. Then Tokyo started burning. The M69 clusters separated at 2,000 feet, scattering 38 individual bomblets across a 100-foot radius. They punched through wooden roofs, ignited, spread jellied fire that stuck to everything it touched. From 7,000 feet, power watched fire blossom across the target area. Not scattered fires, concentrated ignition. Dozens of buildings catching simultaneously. Jesus, his co-pilot breathed. That's just us, Power said. Wait until the others arrive. The others were coming. 324 B-29s in a stream stretching back 120 miles, each carrying 16,000 pounds of incendiaries, each targeting the same X-shaped district, each adding to the fire that was beginning to feed itself. The bombers came in waves, 3 aircraft per minute, 5 aircraft per minute. The sky filled with them, silver shapes reflecting fire glow, dropping their loads, banking away. Below, 1.2 million incendiary bomblets scattered across 3 square miles of central Tokyo. The effect was immediate and biblical. Michiko Tanaka was 34 years old. Mother of 3, widow. Her husband had died at Guadalcanal. She worked in a small factory assembling electrical components for aircraft radios. Tonight she was home with her children when the air raid sirens began. Again, she muttered. The Americans bombed frequently now, usually high altitude, usually ineffective. The procedure was routine. Grab the children, go to the shelter, wait for the all clear. She was wrapping her youngest daughter in a blanket when the first incendiaries hit. The sound was distinct, not the whistle of falling bombs, more like rain, heavy rain, thousands of small impacts on roofs throughout the neighborhood. Then the fires started. Michiko looked out her window and saw flames in every direction. Not distant flames, immediate flames. Buildings across the street were burning. The house 3 doors down was burning. The factory where she worked, 2 blocks away, was a tower of orange flame. "We have to leave," she said. "Now." But where? The fires were everywhere, and the wind was picking up, howling between buildings, carrying sparks and burning debris. She grabbed her children and ran into the street. Around her, thousands of others were doing the same. Families fleeing homes that were already burning or about to burn. Crowds filling narrow streets, all heading the same direction, toward the rivers, away from the fire. Except the fire was everywhere. The Americans had calculated this. The X-shaped target area had been chosen specifically to trap people. Rivers on 2 sides, canals cutting through the middle, limited escape routes. As the fires grew, they'd channel people into smaller and smaller areas. Michiko ran with her children. The youngest, 4 years old, was crying. The older 2, 7 and 9, were silent with terror. The heat was building, not just warmth, real heat, the kind of heat that made breathing difficult. Overhead, the B-29s kept coming. The sound of their engines was a constant thunder. Every few seconds, another load of incendiaries scattered across the burning districts, adding fuel, feeding flames. By 0030 hours, individual fires were merging. Buildings burned, caught neighboring buildings. Those caught their neighbors. Fire spread at walking speed, faster, running speed. The wooden construction that made Japanese homes affordable and quick to build made them perfect tinder. The wind was strengthening, sucked toward the fire center by rising heat. Hot air rises. cold air rushes in to replace it. The fire was creating its own weather system. The Americans had planned for this, studied it, understood that under the right conditions, fire becomes self-perpetuating. Firestorm. Lieutenant James Copeland, bombardier, stared through his sight at what shouldn't be possible. "Sir," he said to his pilot, "the fires, they've merged." Below them, central Tokyo was one continuous flame. 3 square miles of urban area transformed into a sea of orange and red and white-hot yellow. The light was bright enough to read by in the aircraft, bright enough to cast shadows, bright enough to make him turn away from the sight. "Drop on the edges," the pilot ordered. "Spread it out." They dropped their incendiaries on the periphery of the burning zone. Most of the bombers following them did the same. No point hitting the center, it was already gone. Better to expand the fire, catch fresh buildings, maximize destruction. The smoke was rising to 15,000 feet. Thermal currents bounced the B-29s like toys. Several aircraft reported structural damage from turbulence. The heat was so intense they could feel it through the fuselage at 8,000 feet. "How hot is it down there?" the co-pilot asked. Nobody answered. Nobody wanted to calculate, but the mathematics were straightforward. Wood burns at 572 degrees Fahrenheit. Paper at 451 degrees Fahrenheit. Human skin at 160 degrees Fahrenheit. The fires below were reaching 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit in the center, hot enough to melt glass. Boil water instantly, combust material without direct flame contact. Hot enough to turn a city into a crematorium. Michiko had reached the river with her children. So had 10,000 others. The riverbank was packed with refugees fleeing the flames. People were jumping into the water. It was cold, March cold, but the alternative was burning. Behind them, the fire was advancing. A wall of flame 3 stories high. The heat was physical, pushing at her back, drying her throat, making her children cough. She waded into the river. The water was shocking cold, but she didn't care. Her children clung to her. Around her, hundreds of others were doing the same, submerging to escape the heat, holding children above water, praying. The fire reached the riverbank, consumed the buildings lining the water. Debris fell into the river, burning wood, pieces of houses, unidentifiable burning things. The water steamed, people screamed. Some dove under to escape the heat. Some didn't surface. Michiko held her children and watched her neighborhood burn. The factory where she'd worked, the school her children attended, the house where she'd lived with her husband before the war. Everything was gone, transformed into flame and ash in less than 2 hours. The B-29s kept coming, the sound of their engines mixing with the roar of fire and the screams of trapped people and the howl of wind being sucked into the inferno. She would survive this night. Her children would survive. 70% of the people who'd reached the river would survive. The other 30% would drown or burn or die from heat exposure. But those who made it to the river were the lucky ones. Nobody survived in the center. The temperatures exceeded 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The thermal radiation alone was lethal. Oxygen was consumed by the flames faster than it could be replenished. People died from asphyxiation before the fire touched them. Bodies were carbonized, reduced to ash and bone fragments that were later swept into piles and weighed. The fire created winds approaching 50 miles per hour. Hurricane-force winds of superheated air that tore roofs off buildings and carried burning debris for blocks. The winds fed the flames. The flames heated the air. The heated air rose. More wind rushed in. The cycle reinforced itself. Firestorm. The Americans had studied this phenomenon in German cities: Dresden, Hamburg, Cologne. They knew the conditions required: high-density urban area, wooden construction, concentrated incendiary drop, strong prevailing wind. Tokyo had all of them, and LeMay had dropped more incendiaries in 3 hours than the British had dropped on Dresden in 2 days. By 0230 hours, when the last B-29s departed, 16 square miles of Tokyo were burning. Not 16 square miles with fires scattered throughout. 16 continuous square miles of flame. An area larger than Manhattan, south of 14th Street. Gone. Vice Admiral Ugaki stood on the roof of the headquarters building, one of the few concrete structures in Tokyo, and watched his city burn. The headquarters was 4 miles from the target zone. He could feel the heat, see flames reaching hundreds of feet into the air, smell wood smoke so thick it obscured the stars. "Damage estimate?" he asked his aide. The aide's voice shook. We don't know, sir. Communications with the affected districts are severed. Fire department reports the fires are uncontrollable. They've abandoned firefighting and are focusing on evacuation. Casualties? Unknown. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. The affected area is densely populated. Most residents are factory workers, families. How many bombers? Approximately 325, sir. They came in low altitude. We shot down 14 aircraft. Our night fighters were ineffective. The bombs were incendiaries. Ugaki was quiet for a long moment. Below him, Tokyo burned. 16 square miles. The industrial heart of the city. The dispersed manufacturing network that was supposed to be invulnerable to American bombing. Gone. They changed tactics, he said finally. Sir? The Americans, they've changed tactics. No more precision bombing from high altitude. They're burning cities now. The implications settled over him like the smoke choking the city. If the Americans could do this to Tokyo, the most important city in Japan, they could do it to anywhere. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokohama. Every Japanese city was built the same way. Wood and paper, dense and flammable. We underestimated them, Ugaki said. Their precision bombing was ineffective. We assumed that meant B-29s were ineffective. We were wrong. The B-29s are effective. We just hadn't seen what they could really do. What he was seeing now was industrial warfare applied to urban destruction. The same American efficiency that built Liberty ships and Sherman tanks and produced aluminum by the millions of tons. That efficiency directed at burning cities. Recall all leave, Ugaki ordered. Prepare evacuation plans for secondary cities. Order dispersal of critical government functions. If they can do this to Tokyo, they'll do it everywhere. His aide hesitated. Sir, do we inform the civilian population? Inform them of what? Ugaki's voice was bitter. That we can't defend them? That American bombers can burn our cities at will? That everything we told them about Japanese air defenses was optimistic nonsense? The aide was silent. Ugaki watched the flames and did calculations. 300 bombers. 16 square miles destroyed. If the Americans repeated this tactic, and they would, they could burn every major city in Japan within months. The war had changed, not gradually, overnight. The ineffective B-29 campaign he'd dismissed in February had transformed into existential threat in March. And the worst part, the part that made his expertise feel like fraud, was that he should have seen this coming. The capability had always been there. The Americans had the technology, the capacity, the reach. They'd just been using it wrong. Now they were using it right. And Japan was going to burn. March 10, 1945, 0600 hours. Sunrise over Tokyo. Temperature 48 degrees Fahrenheit. The air tasted like ash and death. The fires burned for 16 hours. When dawn came, the scope of destruction emerged from smoke and ruin. 15.8 square miles of Tokyo gone. Not damaged, not burned, obliterated. Reduced to ash and to twisted metal and rubble. In some areas, nothing remained taller than 3 feet. The fires had been so hot, they'd consumed everything combustible and much that shouldn't burn. 267,171 buildings destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed, ceased to exist. The official casualty figure, 88,000 dead. The real figure, probably 100,000 plus. Many bodies were incinerated completely. Many deaths went unrecorded. Entire families vanished. The count was impossible to verify. 100,000 people, dead in a single night, from a single bombing raid. More than Hiroshima, more than Nagasaki. The single most destructive bombing raid in human history. And it had taken 3 hours. March 10th, 1945, Guam, 1400 hours, LeMay's headquarters. Curtis LeMay read the reconnaissance reports and allowed himself no satisfaction, just acknowledgement of results. 14 aircraft lost, Colonel Montgomery reported. 133 crew killed or missing. Target area is 98% destroyed. Tokyo Fire Department estimates 100,000 civilian casualties. The fires were visible from 150 miles away. LeMay nodded. Next targets? Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe are prepared. We can launch against Nagoya tomorrow night if the aircraft are ready. Get them ready. Montgomery hesitated. Sir, there will be questions from Washington. The civilian casualties. Questions about what? LeMay's voice was flat. We bombed military-industrial targets. The Japanese dispersed their war production into civilian areas. That made civilian areas legitimate military targets. We gave them warnings to evacuate. Most ignored them. The casualties are regrettable, but irrelevant to the mission objective. The logic was clean. The rationalization was thin. Everyone knew it. We destroyed 15.8 square miles of Tokyo with 325 bombers in 3 hours, LeMay continued. That's more destruction than 4 months of precision bombing. It's effective. It works. We're going to keep doing it until Japan surrenders or we run out of cities to burn. The campaign had been transformed overnight. The careful, ineffective precision bombing strategy was dead. In its place, systematic urban incineration. March 11th, Nagoya. 285 B-29s. 1,790 tons of incendiaries. 2.3 square miles burned. 1,790 dead. March 13th, Osaka. 274 B-29s. 1,732 tons of incendiaries. 8.1 square miles burned. 3,987 dead. March 16th, Kobe. 331 B-29s. 2,355 tons of incendiaries. 3 square miles burned. 8,841 dead. The pattern was consistent. Low-altitude night attacks. Maximum incendiary loads. Area bombing. The American bomber crews called it the Fire Blitz. The Japanese called it slaughter bombing. Both descriptions were accurate. By the end of March 1945, LeMay's B-29s had burned 32 square miles of Japanese urban area, killed approximately 120,000 civilians, destroyed 500,000 buildings, rendered 2 million people homeless. And Japanese war production, the target that precision bombing couldn't touch, was collapsing. Not because factories were destroyed, but because workers were dead, homeless, or fleeing the cities. Transportation networks were shattered, supply chains broken. The dispersed manufacturing system that was supposed to be invulnerable was disintegrating under fire. Aircraft production in March dropped 40% from February. Intelligence reported to LeMay, steel output is down 35%. The Tokyo raids destroyed machine tools, interrupted transportation, killed skilled workers. The effect is cascading through the entire industrial economy. LeMay allowed himself a grim nod. It was working, not the way doctrine said it should work, not the way Hansel had tried, but working. April 1945, Tokyo. Vice Admiral Ugaki's temporary headquarters. The main building had been damaged by fire. Ugaki read the reports and felt the war ending in his hands. Not dramatically, not with decisive battles, but with statistics that added up to inevitable defeat. 31 major cities have been targeted by incendiary attacks, his aide reported. Combined affected area, 178 square miles, estimated casualties, 300,000 dead, 8 million displaced. War production is at 60% of January levels and falling. Ugaki had spent his career in naval aviation. He understood strategic bombing in theory, but the reality, the industrial-scale destruction the Americans had unleashed, exceeded anything his education had prepared him for. "Our fighter defenses?" he asked. "Ineffective, sir. The B-29s attack at night from low altitude. Our radar coverage is insufficient. Our night fighters lack experience and equipment. We're shooting down approximately 3% of attacking aircraft. It's not enough to deter them." 3%. The Americans were losing 3 aircraft per 100 on raids that destroyed entire cities. The exchange rate was catastrophically in their favor. They could sustain those losses indefinitely. Japan could not sustain the destruction. Evacuation of civilian population? Ongoing. But where do they go? Every major city is a target. The rural areas can't support millions of refugees. We're experiencing food shortages, housing crisis, transportation breakdowns. We're losing the war, Ugaki said quietly. The aide was silent. "We didn't lose it in battle," Ugaki continued. "We lost it in shipyards and factories and bomber production lines. The Americans built a weapon that can burn cities. They built enough of them to burn all our cities. And we have no counter, no defense, no response. The terrible mathematics of industrial warfare, American productive capacity versus Japanese defensive capability. The curve lines had crossed years ago, but the results were only becoming visible now. In burning cities, in casualty reports, in the collapse of war production. In February, I believed the B-29 campaign was ineffective, Ugaki said. I was correct about what I observed. I was wrong about what was possible. The Americans hadn't failed. They were learning. Now they've learned, and we're paying the price for my certainty. May 1945. The firebombing campaign continued. Every major Japanese city larger than 100,000 population was targeted. Some multiple times. The B-29s flew with near impunity. Losses dropped below 2% per raid. Japanese fighter defenses were collapsing. Not enough fuel, not enough pilots, not enough aircraft. By August 1945, the Americans had burned 180 square miles of Japanese urban area, killed an estimated 500,000 civilians, destroyed 2.5 million buildings, made 13 million people homeless. And then, almost as an afterthought, they dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The atomic bombs get remembered. They were dramatic, novel, the symbol of a new age. But they killed fewer people than the Tokyo firebombing. They destroyed less area than the combined incendiary campaigns. The strategic effect of the atomic bombs wasn't raw destruction. LeMay's firebombing had already demonstrated that American aircraft could destroy cities. The atomic bombs just proved they could do it with a single bomber carrying a single weapon. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. The reasons were complex: Soviet entry into the war, the atomic bombs, the accumulated destruction, the emperor's decision. But the foundation of surrender was the realization that the Americans could destroy Japan at will, could burn every city, could kill millions, could do so indefinitely with acceptable losses. The B-29. The bomber that Vice Admiral Ugaki had dismissed as ineffective in February, had proven to be the most destructive weapon of World War II, not because of its technology, because of how Curtis LeMay chose to use it. September 2, 1945. Tokyo Bay, aboard USS Missouri. The surrender ceremony. Vice Admiral Ugaki attended as part of the Japanese delegation. He stood on the deck of an American battleship, watching his nation surrender, and thought about the February morning when he'd read intelligence reports about ineffective B-29 raids. He'd been wrong, not slightly wrong, foundationally wrong. The Americans hadn't been failing with their precision bombing. They'd been experimenting, learning, testing doctrine against reality, and discarding what didn't work. The shift from precision bombing to incendiary attacks wasn't desperation. It was adaptation, a kind of ruthless efficiency that characterized American industrial warfare. They'd tried the elegant solution, precision strikes on strategic targets. When it failed, they'd tried the brutal solution, burn the cities until the war production collapses. And the brutal solution had worked. Ugaki watched General MacArthur sign the surrender documents and understood with bitter clarity this was how America fought wars. Not with elegance or honor or tradition, with overwhelming material force directed at whatever target proved most vulnerable. Japanese cities were vulnerable to fire, so America burned them. The logic was clean. The execution was merciless. The results were decisive. After the ceremony, Ugaki returned to Japan. He would live until 1974, long enough to see Japan rebuild into an economic power, long enough to see B-29s become obsolete, replaced by jets, and then missiles, and then bombers that made the Superfortress look primitive. But he never forgot the night Tokyo burned, the smell of smoke, the orange glow visible for 150 miles, the realization that his expertise had been worthless against an enemy willing to abandon doctrine and pursue results by any means necessary. His memoirs, published after his death, included one paragraph about the Tokyo firebombing. We believed the B-29 was ineffective because we observed its failures. We did not imagine that the Americans would change their entire strategic approach based on those failures. This was our error, assuming that doctrine was fixed rather than flexible. The Americans proved more adaptable than we anticipated. This adaptability, more than any weapon or technology, decided the war. Curtis LeMay retired as a 4-star general, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Architect of Strategic Air Command. He lived until 1990, and throughout his life, reporters asked him about the firebombing of Japan. Was it necessary? They'd ask. His answer never changed. It was effective. Not moral, not justifiable, effective. The firebombing campaign killed approximately 500,000 Japanese civilians, made 13 million homeless, destroyed 180 square miles of urban area. By comparison, the atomic bombs killed 200,000 and destroyed 12 square miles. The fire was more destructive than the atom. We just don't remember it that way because fire is ancient and atoms are novel. Today, the strategic bombing campaign against Japan is studied in military academies as a case study in adaptation. How do you respond when doctrine fails? How do you balance moral considerations against military effectiveness? When is it acceptable to target civilian populations? There are no clean answers. LeMay didn't offer any. He conducted a campaign that achieved its objectives through means that violated every principle of American strategic bombing doctrine. He burned cities full of civilians to destroy industrial capacity that precision bombing couldn't touch. It worked. Japan surrendered. The invasion never happened. American casualties, projected at 500,000 for an invasion, never materialized. But 500,000 Japanese civilians died, most of them women, children, elderly, most of them uninvolved in war production, victims of a strategy that defined military target broadly enough to include their homes. The B-29 Museum at the March Field Air Museum in California has a preserved superfortress. Visitors can walk through it, sit in the pilot's seat, touch the bomb bay where incendiary clusters were loaded. A placard describes the aircraft's capabilities: range, altitude, bomb load, crew size. It mentions the firebombing campaign briefly. B-29s conducted strategic bombing of Japanese industrial targets throughout 1945, contributing to Japan's decision to surrender. Contributing? Strategic? Industrial targets. The sanitized language obscures the reality. These aircraft burned cities, killed civilians on an industrial scale, applied American manufacturing efficiency to urban destruction. Vice Admiral Ugaki's observation was prescient. American adaptability decided the war. But adaptability is morally neutral. It's a capability, not a virtue. The Americans adapted their bombing strategy when precision failed. They adapted by burning cities. It was effective. Whether it was necessary, whether those 500,000 civilian deaths were the only way to end the war, remains contested. Some historians argue the firebombing was essential, that Japan would not have surrendered without the demonstrated capability for total destruction. Others argue it was excessive, that Japan was already defeated by mid-1945, that the atomic bombs or Soviet entry would have forced surrender without the firebombing. Curtis LeMay didn't engage in those debates. When asked if he'd done the right thing, he said, "I was trying to save American lives. If we'd lost the war, I'd have been tried as a war criminal. But we won, so I'm a hero. That's how it works." The honesty was brutal, accurate. Today, precision-guided munitions can strike targets with accuracy that would have seemed miraculous in 1945. Modern air forces don't need to burn entire cities to destroy industrial capacity. Technology has made the choice between precision and brutality less stark. But LeMay's lesson remains. When doctrine fails, adaptation matters more than theory. When elegant solutions don't work, brutal solutions become tempting. The question isn't whether they work. Firebombing obviously worked. The question is, what price we accept for effectiveness? 500,000 Japanese civilians paid that price. They burned in fires started by weapons designed specifically to set cities ablaze. Fires that created their own weather systems, that reached temperatures hot enough to melt metal and boil water and combust human bodies without direct contact. Somewhere in Tokyo, in a memorial garden dedicated to the victims of the March 9th, 10th raid, there's a stone monument. Carved into it are 88,000 names. The official count, not the complete count. Many bodies were never identified, many deaths never recorded, but 88,000 names of people who died in a single night when American bombers dropped 1,665 tons of incendiaries on a city built of wood. Visitors leave flowers, burn incense, read the names. Most don't know that the raid was the result of strategic adaptation, that the Americans had tried precision bombing, found it ineffective, and switched to area incendiary attacks, that the decision was made by a 38-year-old general who valued results over doctrine. They just know that one night their city burned. The sky turned orange. The heat was lethal at 1,500 feet from the fire center. People died by the tens of thousands. And overhead, Curtis LeMay's B-29s circled, dropping more fire, feeding the flames, until there was nothing left to burn. That's the legacy, not the technology, not the tactics. The willingness to do whatever proves effective, regardless of cost, regardless of precedent, regardless of doctrine. The Japanese admirals thought B-29s were ineffective because they measured results against expectations. They expected precision bombing. They got firestorms instead. The error wasn't in their observation. It was in their imagination. They couldn't imagine that the Americans would abandon doctrine completely, would trade precision for totality, would choose to burn cities rather than hit factories. Curtis LeMay didn't just change tactics. He changed what bombing meant, transformed it from a strategic tool aimed at military targets into a weapon of urban destruction aimed at civilian populations and industrial capacity simultaneously. The B-29 made it possible. American industrial capacity made it sustainable. And LeMay's willingness to discard failed approaches made it real. On March 9, 1945, Vice Admiral Ugaki believed B-29s were ineffective. By March 10th, he was standing on a rooftop watching 16 square miles of Tokyo burn. The difference was one night, one raid, 325 bombers, 1,665 tons of incendiaries, and a general who understood that effectiveness matters more than elegance, that results justify methods, that winning requires adaptation, even when adaptation means doing things that peacetime morality would condemn. That's not a comfortable legacy. It's just true. The B-29s were ineffective, until they weren't, until Curtis LeMay changed how they were used, until Tokyo burned. And after Tokyo, 66 more cities. Until Japan surrendered. Until the war ended. Until the fires finally went out.